Excuse me. Alright, I started a new video because that one was getting kind of long. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And they built Pithom and Ramesses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. I guess they comforted themselves with having copulation with their wives after a hard day's work, I guess. The more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with hard labor and brick and mortar, and with all kinds of work in the fields. And all their hard labor, the Egyptians used them ruthlessly. I don't know how long this was going on for. Was this 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? I'm not sure. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah. So we get the names of the midwives, but not the name of the king. When you help the Hebrew women in childbirth, and you observe them on the delivery stool, if it is a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, let her live. The midwives, kind of the opposite of what they do in China these days, isn't it? Isn't that what I've always heard about China? They kill the girl babies, but not the boy babies, for overpopulation's sake. I'm not sure if that's still accurate or not. I think they might have changed that policy over the years, but they used to do that. This is the opposite of that. They don't want the boys around. I'm not sure what they're going to do. Frankly, I don't know what Pharaoh's solution... I mean, if you have a nation, ultimately, that consists of nothing but females, I mean, what would you... I mean, you wouldn't be able to use them as slaves any longer. I mean, at least not slaves that were going to build your cities. They wouldn't be using the women slaves for that. So I don't know exactly what his plan was long term. I mean, he just wanted to... He wanted to cull their numbers and eliminate the possible fighting force in the population. But I'm not sure what his long-term plan was with a nation solely of female slaves. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live, so this plan doesn't work anyway. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives. And again, how long does it take him to figure that out? A year, 2 years, 3? I don't know. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, "Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live?" The midwives answered Pharaoh, "Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive." So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Well, Pharaoh did not contest their explanation, so he must have believed it. I'm not sure if there was a kernel of truth in that or not. Apparently, it seems like it's a lie, or at least an indirect answer to his question, because we read a couple verses ago they specifically didn't do what the king of Egypt told them to do. And this is their explanation for, which may or may not be truthful, or may not have a kernel of truth in it. But whatever is the case, Pharaoh apparently accepted their explanation and didn't pursue it further. So he must have, whatever it was, it must have been believable. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people: "Every boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live." Of course, throwing into the Nile obviously means the baby will drown, but in the end what would happen is it'd get eaten by crocodiles. The Nile River was full of crocodiles. And so throwing the infants into the river, they would drown, of course, in the water, but they would ultimately be eaten by crocodiles. Now, I don't know how long that would have been going on for. In fact, we don't even have any records of that happening, except for this one instance where Moses gets put in a basket in the river. It couldn't have been going on for too terribly long, because 80 years later, Moses comes back to Israel, and they have an entire, army worth of fighting men, men of fighting age. So this plan to throw all the boys into the Nile couldn't have lasted for too long. Excuse me. Now, a man of the house of Levi, married a Levite woman, so a woman from the house of Levi. So a full-blooded Levite here is what we're getting. And she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. This is actually, well, Moses and Aaron. Moses had an older brother named Aaron, and they had an older sister named Miriam. So this is not the first time these two parents have conceived. And she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, or a healthy child, she hid him for 3 months. So a child, in other words, that was likely to survive infancy, which not every child did back in those days. In fact, the reason why the mortality rate was so high, and why one of the big okay, so we talk about lifespans. We read, of course, the beginning of the book of Genesis, these really long lifespans, which again is not even uncommon for the literature of the ancient world, because many cultures had as part of their history this idea that kings and people of the past lived very, very long lives, far longer even than the ages that are recorded in Genesis. So there was this shared cultural belief that at one point in the past, man lived longer than he was living in these days. And even here, Moses ends up reaching 120. Joseph was 110. That's not too far out there. But it really wasn't a matter, we think of lives at this point in time as being short, but it wasn't so much, and it's staying that way for a long time, but it wasn't so much a matter of short adulthoods per se, depending again on how. Moses wasn't a slave, okay? He was not doing all this hard labor as a young man, wearing his body out, building cities, and doing whatever, okay? That obviously would take its toll on you if that's what you were doing for a living. He was in the palace for 40 years. His first 40 years. Now, he was a fighter. We read in other records that he was he would have been, as the son of a pharaoh, he would have been the adopted son of a pharaoh. He would have been a soldier, a general in the army, but really, in all honesty, the main thing that was holding back longevity and caused the high mortality rates was simply getting out of infancy, getting out of childhood. It's like if you could survive into adolescence or young adulthood, you had a pretty good chance of living a long time. So this is a child that is going to survive infancy. So she hid him for 3 months. No sense in throwing this one in the river. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. I don't know if she was told to by her mother, she just did it on her own, I don't know. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe. So wherever Pharaoh lives, he's not far away from these Israelites, because his daughter is just going to the Nile River to bathe. And her attendants were, isn't it interesting, now I admit, I've never seen the Nile. I don't know what the Nile is like today. But I live next to the Mississippi River, which is another one of the longest rivers in the world. I see the Mississippi River all the time. So much so that it's no big deal to me to see the Mississippi River. I couldn't imagine bathing in the Mississippi River. I mean, I could imagine few things worse than bathing in the Mississippi River. That's high on the list of things that I will never ever do. Again, I don't know what the Nile is like. Knowing our planet today, I have a hard time believing it's a whole lot better. But I do know what the Mississippi is like, and the Mississippi River is nasty, gross, disgusting, and horrible. You would never want to get in it to bathe. Ugh. Once upon a time, though, you could do that. Once upon a time, if you had a nice, free-flowing river that emptied out to the sea, you could get in and bathe. Our planet is different now. I don't think I would recommend this to anybody anywhere in the world at any point in time. Again, I don't know about the Nile, but I do know about the Mississippi, and the Mississippi is definitely not a river that I would ever want to bathe in. Anyway, Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket amongst the reeds, and sent her slave girl to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Then his sister, remember her, she was hiding around nearby. So she comes up, asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. And the girl went and got the baby's mother. That was very clever of her. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water."